from the Minamata Convention Secretariat. This is the second day of a week-long series of online side events in preparation for COP4.2 in Bali, and this is the fourth event today. Side events are an important part of the Minamata Convention Conference of the Parties. They provide an opportunity to exchange information and bring advances in technology, research, and policy to the attention of parties and to the global community in that the convention serves. The Secretariat is proud to present to you the event entitled Eliminating Mercury in Lighting, a win-win for health and the environment, which has been organized by CLASP. This event very much relates to the COP4.2 agenda item on the review and amendment proposal of Annex A on mercury products. Before I turn over to the floor to the event organizer, I'd like to go over a couple of housekeeping notes. I speak the second point. You can open the participant panel and chat panel by clicking the respective icon at the bottom right corner of your screen. And the next two bullets about the taking the floor, but I understand that the organizer wishes to use the chat panel to collect questions. So I will go to the fifth point. You may also you may wish to type questions in the chat box and send it to everyone to ask any question. If you need any technical assistance, please put your message in the chat box and send it to the host. Please kindly note that this session is recorded and broadcasted. Recording of this session and the presentation slides will be made available through the Minamata Convention website shortly after the session. With this, I would like to hand over to Elena, who is going to moderate the session.
Thank you very much, Isaacu. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everybody. My name is Elena Limberidis Etimo. I'm a policy manager of the Zero Mercury campaign at the European Environmental Bureau, the largest EU NGO network. And I've been working with mercury since 2004 at the UN global level. Also, at the same time, I'm a co-coordinator of the Zero Mercury Working Group since 2005. Relevant to our subject today, I've already been following also the LAMP debate since 2008. As Isaac mentioned, given the short time, we said it would be best to take questions via the chat, and we will address as many as possible at the end of all the presentations, and then remaining questions can be addressed via email to the organizers. So let me start by introducing today's side event. Accelerating the transition from fluorescent lighting to LED technology achieves the quintessential win-win, removing toxic mercury from our offices, homes, and the environment, while cost-effectively avoiding millions of tons of CO2 emissions. This panel of experts will address the problem of mercury lighting in our homes and in our offices. It will start by summarizing new research and findings on a health-related study evaluating exposure risk to mercury from lighting and the effect on people, all the way from production to disposal. We will then move into providing an overview of the EU policy process, including the Directive of Restriction of Hazardous Substances and also the Ecodesign Directive, and quantify the associated CO2, mercury, and economic savings of an LED future in Europe. And finally, the panel, we present new cutting-edge market data from last year from Africa, Latin America, and the Southeast Asia, which demonstrate the feasibility of eliminating mercury-based lighting in these regions, and also the benefits of accelerating the shift to LED lighting globally. So for the first panel, we have with us Michael Bender, who is the director of the Mercury Policy Project. Michael has worked for over 25 years on waste management and mercury issues. He is also co-founder and co-coordinator of the Zero Mercury Working Group, an international coalition with the goal of reducing mercury in the global environment to a minimum through supporting implementation of the Minamata Convention. Together with Michael, we have Peter Maxson, director of a Brussels-based consultancy, many of you who will know, He has focused more of his efforts on mercury-related issues over the past 20 years, and he has contributed significantly to the development of the Minamata Convention on Mercury and continues to support a range of efforts to improve its implementation and extend its scope. So I'm passing the floor to Michael to start the presentation. Thank you.
Thanks, Elena, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening. The focus of the joint presentation today with Peter Maxson is on a report we released last fall with the Clean Lighting Coalition on mercury and fluorescent lighting, unnecessary health risks, and actionable solutions. Next slide, please. This slide presents the typical mercury content of fluorescent lamps. These include T12s, T8s, and T5s, as well as compact fluorescent lamps. Most contain less than 5 milligrams, but that adds up due to the sheer number of lamps in circulations that will eventually be disposed of. Next slide, please. During the entire life cycle of a fluorescent lamp, from manufacturing to transportation, use, and final disposal, there are many ways that mercury can be released to the environment, as you can see in this slide schematic. After manufacturing, mercury releases from lamp breakage may occur during use, when discarded with general waste, during collection and transport of discarded lamps, during recycling operations, and from landfills, incinerators, or other waste management practices, including open burning. Due to low recycling rates, most mercury from lamps is released to the environment when disposed of. Next slide. Our study identified certain groups of most concern from exposure to mercury from lamp breakage. The top of this list are sensitive populations, including the developing fetus, infants, children, pregnant, and breastfeeding women. People with underlying health conditions or those who are chronically exposed to a range of pollutants are also at greater risk. In addition, workers involved in fluorescent lamp manufacturing, transportation, collection, processing, recycling, and disposal are also at risk. Next slide, please. A lamp broken indoors can result in mercury vapor levels in exceedance of some government guidelines. Most at risk, as I mentioned earlier, are infants and the developing fetus, who, as we know, are more susceptible to developmental disabilities. Initial release of mercury vapor is most immediate concern, since mercury levels are most likely to be elevated then. After breakage, according to a lamp breakage study by the state of Maine, confirmed that mercury releases are likely to be elevated for at least 10 minutes, and toddlers in particular can experience high mercury exposures. Next slide, please. Workers can also be exposed to mercury throughout the life cycle, as I mentioned earlier. The organs most affected by inhalation of elemental mercury vapors are the brain and kidneys. Various studies have observed impaired neural behavioral functions associated with long-term occupational exposure to mercury vapor at relatively low levels. Weakened memory, insomnia, dizziness, and tremors, among other symptoms, have been observed in workers at higher exposures. Next slide, please. Also, according to our report findings, research indicates that when an individual is exposed to a mixture of toxic substances, the health effects can be magnified in unpredictable ways. Even if the exposure is low, mixed exposures of toxic substances have been demonstrated to induce health effects that any of the individual substances would not have induced at such low levels on their own. Moreover, such effects are magnified in vulnerable populations. As you can see in the diagram, every time one vulnerability or exposure overlaps with another, the health risk is magnified. Report co-author Peter Maxson will continue the presentation from here. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. Can we have the next slide, please? Good day, good evening to everyone. In the following slides, I'll discuss the health effects of mercury exposures in a bit more detail, the challenges of setting exposure limits, and how to deal with broken fluorescent lamps and other small mercury spills. And I'll end up with some important recommendations. In this slide, it's evident that we may be exposed to mercury in three different forms: elemental, inorganic, or organic. While there are some health effects shared by different forms of mercury exposure, each form of mercury is toxic in its own way, and each with preferred exposure pathways and targeting particular parts of the body. In this case, we'll focus on the elemental or liquid mercury that's the form most commonly used in fluorescent lamps. If a lamp is not broken, no mercury is released during normal operation, but when a lamp is broken, any mercury in liquid form begins to vaporize, and this will occur more rapidly with any increase in temperature. The lungs take in mercury vapor and pass most of it to the bloodstream, where it then easily crosses the blood-brain barrier and can damage the central nervous system. Damage to the central nervous system may manifest itself as physical tremors, emotional effects, insomnia, neuromuscular changes, headaches, poor performance on tests of mental acuity, etc. Other toxic effects from mercury vapor exposure have been observed in the immune system, in the kidneys and the lungs, and it became clear many years ago that exposure limits were needed to protect workers and others. Next slide, please. For many years, government agencies and others have carried out research to determine no observed adverse effect levels for mercury exposure. In other words, levels of exposure at which one would see no negative health effects. A key challenge here is that exposure limits may be different for different subjects: adults, children, fetuses, for long versus short-term exposures, for workers as opposed to the general public, not to mention what further safety margin to use, because some individuals appear to be more sensitive than others. For example, if limited health effects are observed in individuals exposed to 20,000 nanograms per cubic meter in the air, it might be decided to set the exposure limit 100 times lower at 200 nanograms to ensure a much better overall protection. But of course, these margins are open for discussion. In the late 1990s, exposure limits for different groups were proposed for mercury levels in urine, blood, and hair. But then it was observed that mercury concentrations in urine, blood, and hair don't necessarily reflect the accumulations in body tissues, especially the brain and kidneys. And the developing fetus, as Michael said, was found to be especially vulnerable. And next slide, please. This slide shows a selection of the recommended exposure limits for mercury vapor in air in nanograms per cubic meter. Some of them developed many years ago. From the top, we show the typical concentration of mercury in ambient outdoor air. Next, we see the long-term exposure limit developed by California, and then the limit developed by the ATSDR specifically to ensure that children are protected, followed by the short-term exposure limit developed by California, and finally the ACGIH limit for occupational exposure. It's important to note the 1,000-fold difference between the long-term exposure limit developed by California at 30 nanograms per cubic meter and the ACGIH limit for basically long-term occupational exposure of 25,000 nanograms per cubic meter, which can be explained only by the fact that different criteria and safety margins were used in the setting of these limits. Moreover, we shouldn't be surprised that mercury exposure limits that were once considered safe, even 10 years ago, are now seen by many researchers as not providing adequate protection from harm, especially in early life and for other particularly vulnerable individuals. Next slide, please. When a lamp breaks, the state of Maine published a research report, also mentioned in passing by Michael, that examined in great detail mercury releases from broken lamps. Among other findings, it reported that following the breakage of a single CFL, the mercury concentration in the study room air often exceeded the Maine ambient air guideline of 300 nanograms per cubic meter, with short episodes above 25,000 nanograms per cubic meter, and in some cases even higher. In most cases, a short period of ventilation was enough to significantly reduce the concentration of mercury in the air. However, depending on the circumstances, as simple as people walking across a contaminated carpet, the mercury air concentration sometimes rebounded, especially if the room was no longer ventilated. Which brings us to the question of what to do when a lamp breaks. Next slide, please. We should probably start with what not to do, which includes vacuuming, which not only contaminates the vacuum cleaner, but also heats and raises the air mercury concentration. We shouldn't put mercury waste down the drain. We should be careful about walking in an area where there's been a broken lamp or mercury spill, as shoes can easily spread the mercury. And since mercury is not destroyed by cleaning products, it can easily contaminate a washing machine or other clothing that it might touch. So what should we do to deal with the mercury spill? Next slide, please. Based on recommendations from the Agency for Toxic Substances and Disease Registry, the ATSDR, and the US EPA, these are the short instructions for cleaning up a small mercury spill. The main steps include removing people and pets from the room, gathering useful cleanup items, putting on waterproof gloves, removing and discarding contaminated carpeting, removing mercury from shoes, clothing, properly disposing of cleanup materials, and finally determining whether further action or resources may be needed if there's still contamination. The concerns raised in all of these slides further confirm that when there's a mercury-free alternative product, and especially when that alternative is cost-effective, the mercury-added product should no longer be used. Next slide, please. I'll finish with some basic recommendations. Websites and other platforms that still promote fluorescent lamps should be updated in favor of LED lighting. Parties to the Minamata Convention should support the African region's proposed amendment to phase out fluorescent lamps, which would then apply to all parties to the convention. States and local governments should adopt mercury reduction policies and or enforce those already in place. Schools, childcare and healthcare facilities, public housing facilities, etc., should all make a priority of replacing their fluorescent lamps. Final slide, please. Lighting manufacturers and distributors should be encouraged to stop promoting and selling fluorescents and to actually support legislation to phase out fluorescent lamps. Utilities should advocate for federal, state, and local policies that contribute to the phase out of fluorescent lamps, and environmental groups should better coordinate and work together for the same objective. Thank you very much for your interest and for spreading this information among your own networks. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael and Peter. Without further delay, thank you very much for these findings and for reminding us of the dangers from mercury from broken lamps and during use and disposal. We can now move to the update from the EU. We have with us Dr. Peter Bennek, a senior advisor of the Swedish Energy Agency. Since 2002, Dr. Bennek has been working with energy policies with the Swedish government, focusing on energy efficiency. In his present position, he's working with the EU product regulations on eco-design, minimum energy performance standards, and energy labeling. Together with Peter, we have Mike Solland, senior advisor at CLASP, working to support governments around the world in the development and implementation of energy efficiency programs and policies With over 25 years experience on policy and analysis, he has worked on a broad range of lighting, appliances, and equipment, as well as emerging technologies and market transformation programs. The floor is yours, Peter. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Helena, and hello, everyone. So I and Mike will speak a little about the policy pathway in Europe to phase out the fluorescent lighting in general lighting applications to 2023. It's been a long process, and I will describe a little bit. So if you go to the next slide, please. So yes, focusing then on the fluorescent lighting, the normal tubes and compact fluorescent lighting. It also includes street lighting, actually, but I'll leave that aside right now. And I guess you could do the policies in different ways. In Europe, we have used two policy instruments. The Restriction of Hazardous Substances Directive, the ROS, and then the Ecodesign Directive. So if you go to the next slide.
Peter, your sound is quite poor. I'm not sure if there's something wrong with it. You sound very strange, and it's a bit choppy.
I'm sorry. What can I do?
One thing
Should I try
to switch off your video, outgoing video.
Maybe it's a bandwidth issue.
Okay. Will this help? Is it better?
A little bit better, I think.
Yes. Okay. I hear everyone a little bit choppy. Maybe it's something wrong with my connection. Okay. I hope you can hear me somewhat. So if you turn to the next slide, please. So if I start then with the ROS Directive, this is a directive that was passed in 2003 and it was revised in 2011. And the point with the ROS is really to either limit or ban poisonous substances. It's a list of 10. It's a mercury, lead, cadmium, etc. And you can say by default, these substances are banned in products unless there is a reason for these products to be on the market, because there are no other products available using no poisonous materials. So for fluorescent lighting, they are or were on the list, exemption list, and there you have a maximum amount of milligrams for each one of these products. So in order to put a product on the market, you must be compliant with the different regulations, and that includes then the ROS. If you then go to the next slide, there you have another policy instrument, which is the Ecodesign Directive. In your region, you might call it Minimum Energy Performance Standards, or MEPS. And this was passed in 2005, and this in effect started in 2008. And there you have regulations primarily focusing instead on energy efficiency requirements, but also have performance and quality requirements. So for lighting, you have requirements on minimum color rendering and lifetime, for example, but also other quality requirements. So lighting products has been regulated for a long time, actually, starting already in 2009, when we banned the incandescent and started to regulate fluorescent lighting products. And it's also then covered by the CE marking. If you then go to the next slide. So in short, these work in different ways, which we have been utilizing a little bit. So the ROS Directive, it is what is called in Europe as a delegated act. So the Commission, they carry out and implement the regulation. However, they do consult with experts and also the member states, but there is no vote. And it's also a little bit hard sometimes to follow the process because not all information is disclosed. And as we said before, the decisions are driven by the toxicity of the substances. The Ecodesign Directive, on the other hand, follows another policy process. It's much more open. You also engage the member states much more, and also other stakeholders and experts. And finally, there is a proper vote by member states if the regulation should pass. So it's much more transparent and participative than ROS. And as I said before, the decisions are mainly driven then by least life cycle costs, which then relates to the energy efficiency, and then on other quality and performance requirements. So if we go to the next slide. So jumping back a little bit on the lighting market, and Mike will speak more to this later on. So if you just jump back a little bit to 2005, there was a famous report published by the IEA, the International Energy Agency, saying that about 3,000 terawatt hours per year was spent on lighting in electricity. So terawatt hours is actually billions of watts, watt hours or kilowatt hours. But the thing was also that it was projected to increase to 5,000 terawatt hours per year in 2030, unless there were policy interventions. And as it turned out, at the same time, there were a lot of development. The lighting industry had been very conservative for a long time. Before that, incandescent and fluorescent lighting being dominant. But here, suddenly you had this new technology coming in, which was the LED, the LED, that already then, 2005, was a promising technology, promising to be transformative with much higher efficiency, and then no mercury and other properties that were also attractive. At the same time, new knowledge on the relationship between light and health came by researchers. The blue light in the morning, for example, to adjust to what we call the circadian rhythm, and etc. So the LED that came from the electronic industry. So that meant that there were a lot of new actors coming into the market suddenly, and that posed a challenge to the old lighting industries, because they were legacy companies still doing fluorescent lighting and incandescent, whereas the new companies, they were only doing the LED-based lighting. So if we turn then to the next slide. So all in all, the policymakers now, having different policy instruments available, had to pose these challenges. For example, how should we then assess the market development when the market suddenly changed so fast, both technology-wise and then sales distributions? And then how could we then guarantee the quality of lighting when we now use the new technology? I think you all remember the very bluish LEDs from the beginning, which was not really proper lighting. And then how did we then explain to normal consumers why they suddenly should leave out the incandescent and buy something new that they didn't know what it was? And then finally, also the companies. We really had to understand how to sort of help the legacy companies to make the switch, to incentivize them to do it and not stay with the old technology. And then for the new companies, to help them to understand what lighting is, so they provide products that actually have good lighting qualities. So there were many things to think about as a policymaker in order to do the proper regulations. So if we go to the next slide, please. So as a summary, what happened then since the start in 2009, there have been a lot of regulation from the Ecodesign side, phasing out incandescent halogens, different types of street lighting, but then also the compact fluorescent lighting and then the linear fluorescent lighting. But as you can see in the list there, you see at the last bullet, it says T8 linear fluorescent will be gone next year, but it didn't say anything about the T5. Instead, the ROS regulation that sort of a little bit followed the Ecodesign, but for other reasons then, because now there were other products on the market that could do the same job. There you see at the last bullet that was both T8 and T5. So here, altogether, Ecodesign and ROS together basically has phased out or will phase out all different types of fluorescent lighting on the European market, paving the way for LED instead. So then comes the questions, what about LED quality? And then here I turn now to Mike to take over.
Thank you, Peter. And I would just add there that everyone who's registered for today's webinar will receive a copy of these slides. And those citations are, in fact, hyperlinks to the regulations themselves. So you can follow up with some of your own research if you like. So yes, thanks very much, Peter. Mike Scholand here from CLASP, and I'm going to start by talking about some of the key questions that came up during the policy process, both in Ecodesign and in the ROS Directive. So one of the main questions was, are there actually mercury-free alternatives to fluorescent? And to answer this question, Peter and I downloaded compatibility tables that the major LED lamp suppliers in Europe have published on their website. So I downloaded, I think, 4, 5, 6 of them as PDFs, converted them into Excel, and created a consolidated table where I matched the different ballast types that were in the compatibility tables with the LED lamps that are able to operate on that specific ballast. And this database is actually available on the Minamata Secretariat's website, and there's a hyperlink for it there in the last bullet on this slide. And we found essentially there's an excellent availability. There are tens of thousands of models of LED lamps available, and the compatibility rate based on the EU installed stock of ballasts is in excess of 90%, 91 to 93%. Subsequent to this study, there was a second study done in North America, and they found slightly higher. They found 92 to 94% compatibility. That study was published just last week. And I'd just like to highlight here, the manufacturers' websites also highlight the simplicity of the transition. For example, Philips says that there's no need to change drivers or rewire. You have a plug-and-play solution that works straight out of the box. Osram describes a product they call the Substitube, which is substituting with an LED, and it's quick, simple, and a safe lamp replacement without rewiring. So this is the type of information that manufacturers are using to promote the transition and to accelerate the transition to LED, which is in line with the African proposal to the Minamata Convention. Next slide, please. Another key question that comes up is, are LED lamps safe to use? This is true. Well, this is LED tubes, but any LED lamp, a general service LED lamp or an LED tube. And this is, again, some manufacturer literature. This is from August 2016. So that is almost 6 years ago now that Philips published this. And they described LED tubes as 100% safe. It's the easiest way to upgrade existing luminaires to LED technology, 100% safe and 0% hassle with a simple lamp-for-lamp replacement. And the reason they're able to make that statement is because of these 2 IEC safety standards that are published in the lower left-hand corner of this screen. And those are both hyperlinks, so you can go and have a look at those on the IEC web store. So 62560 2011 is a safety standard for self-ballasted LED lamps. So those would be the ones that you would have here, for example, that would replace a compact fluorescent lamp. And IEC 62776 2014 would be the type of safety standard that would govern an LED tube such as this one. So these safety standards essentially protect consumers and make sure that the manufacturers who certify to these standards are placing safe products on the market that are 100% safe, and you don't need to worry when you make the transition. Next slide, please. And this was a compelling factor, as Peter highlighted under the Ecodesign Directive, the cost effectiveness of the transition. So this is one of the examples that we used in the work that CLASP submitted to the European Commission. So we have a baseline product. This is a linear fluorescent T8. It's a halophosphate or a tri-band phosphor, it's called in Minamata. And we compare that to 2 different LED products, a kind of low-end model, the LED1, which is €6.77, and then a high-end model, which has a longer lifetime, €12.75. And if you look at the numbers in this table, it's an incredible story. The wattage drops from 36 watts with the fluorescent tube to 18 watts with the cheaper LED tube, or as low as 12.5 watts with the premium model, the professional level one. And those lamps, these are all producing equivalent amounts of light when they're installed in the fixture. LEDs are directional by nature, so the LED tubes direct the light downward from the fixture and create the same illumination in the room without having all that wasted light that goes up into the fixture and gets reflected back down into the tube, which you have with fluorescent lamps. So that's part of the sales proposition or the value of LED. You see there's a longer lifetime, so you don't have to change the lamps as often. That means you can have better reliability. You can save a little bit on maintenance costs and waste going to the landfill. And then let's look at the annual cost of electricity. Using the average electricity price here for Europe, which was 12 euro, sorry, that's very expensive, 12 euro cents, 12 euro cents. The annual cost to run a fluorescent tube, 10 hours per day, so 3,600 hours a year, was 16 euros. So you can see, in fact, just in 1 year, you're paying multiples over the purchase price in energy. And then you look at the LED, it's half the price with the low cost LED tube. And with LED 2, the premium one, it's even lower. It's a third of what you're paying with the fluorescent. So the payback periods are very attractive. And you can see in LED 1, 4.5 months, it's paid for itself, and then it goes on to last for many years, saving the owner energy and saving them on their electricity bills. Next slide, please. Sorry, thank you. I do get into the detail, don't I? This slide is to look at the EU lighting policy through a Minamata lens, because I know you're preparing for the COP4 in Bali. So these are the categories for compact fluorescent lamps, linear fluorescent lamps, and CCFL, EEFL, the cold cathode and external electrode fluorescent. So the annex currently has limits on the amount of mercury for each of those products, and those limits took effect in 2020. And the African proposal is to remove all of those categories except for CFL NI, the pin-based ones. And just looking here as Peter was presenting the Ecodesign and the ROS Directive regulations, you can see that the European domestic regulations that operate on the EU domestic law have already conducted a quite complete phase out. In fact, when the ROS amendments take effect in 2023, a complete removal of the fluorescent products that are listed in Minamata. So it's nice to see that, and we're hoping that the EU will also support the proposal from the African region, which proposes the same. Next slide. So just to conclude our last slide here, Ecodesign did remove many fluorescent products from Europe on the basis of life cycle cost. They started in 2018 with CFLs, 2021 with CFLs and T12s, and then 2023 with everything else, including Ecodesign and the ROS directives. So all general purpose fluorescent lamps will be removed from the European market by August 24th, 2023. Feasibility was demonstrated that there's a high rate of retrofit capability, that 91 to 93% of the stock of fluorescent fixtures can accommodate a direct drop-in replacement LED tube. And the consultants who conducted that analysis for the European Commission calculated that the ROS phase out, had it taken effect in 2021 when they had planned, nearly 30 billion euros in net savings. That's taking into account the higher purchase cost of LEDs, the tremendous energy savings that comes from that, and changing some of the luminaires, a 30 billion euro net savings decision. This is part of what drove the Commission to take that step. And in terms of mercury being avoided, it's almost 3 tons of mercury from the lamps themselves and another 2.5 tons from the coal emissions from the power station. So we're talking just over 5 tons of mercury that are avoided because of this step that was taken in Europe. So Minamata really is an opportunity to scale up this success that we've seen in the EU Policy Forum, phasing out general purpose fluorescent lighting globally, as was proposed by the African Lighting Amendment at COP4, because as it says there, real pros say farewell to fluorescent. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Peter and Mike, for this important information. Indeed, the EU has moved on very recently into banning the remaining lamps, and we hope indeed that this leadership can continue as we go into the COP. However, let's see now what's going on the rest of the world. So we have with us Ana Maria Carreno, who is a Deputy Director at the CLIC, at the Clean Lighting Coalition, which is a global partnership to capture the health and environment benefits of transitioning to energy efficient mercury-free LED lighting. And she has over 15 years of experience of managing regional and national programs. Rachel Kamande is the regional lead for Africa and the Middle East for the Clean Lighting Coalition. Rachel has been involved in policy and advocacy work against chemicals and environmental pollution since 2005, focusing mainly in Africa, and has also worked for the European Environmental Bureau on mercury issues in 2011. Finally, from the Asian part, we have Satish Sinha, the Associate Director of Toxic Slings. Toxic Sling is a leading environmental group in India, and Satish has been seasoned campaigner and has made significant contributions in shaping the waste and chemicals policy and regulatory frameworks in India. Anna, the floor is yours. Thanks.
So much, Elena. So what we wanted to do in this section today was share with you the results of an effort that was launched last year by the Clean Lighting Coalition in order to collect evidence on the technical and economic feasibility of mercury-free alternatives to fluorescent lighting across these three regions, Africa, Latin America, and Asia. I will share the results of this effort, and then we will hear from my colleague Rachel and my colleague Satish about country snapshots in India and Africa as well, to show the progress that these regions and countries have made in the transition to LEDs. Can we go to the next slide, please? Really what we wanted to is answer two main questions. As Mike shared before, one of the key questions is whether there are alternatives, mercury-free alternatives, and they are available. And the other key question is whether these mercury-free LED alternatives are affordable today. In order to answer this question, we decided to launch this data collection effort across 35 countries in Africa, Latin America, and Asia. We work with a group of NGOs on the ground that display teams in order to collect information on retailer stores and shops, on the lamps that are available for consumers as well. We were able to gather more than 1,300 models of both mercury-containing fluorescent lamps and LEDs as well, on the two main categories for consideration in Annex A, which is general service lamps, so compact fluorescent lamps, and the replacement LEDs, and then linear tube lamps and the linear and the LED replacements as well. And what we did is we created match pairs of the equivalents of these lamps. Next slide, please. Here in this slide, you see the group of NGOs that we work on the ground. This is an effort that would not have been possible without their support and their effort as well. So I just wanted to acknowledge that these NGOs were an important effort in collecting this information, and thank you for your efforts. Next slide, please. Here in this slide, we see the results of the data collection. On the left side, the list of countries for which we have collected information on the ground. So hopefully you will be able to find your country over there. And then in the figure, we have efficacy of the lamps, so the lumens per watt on the y-axis, and then the light output lumens on the x-axis. And here you see very clearly the differentiation between the three technologies. On the bottom end, least efficient lighting technologies are incandescent lamps. In the middle of the chart, you see fluorescent lamps, both tubular fluorescent lamps in yellow and CFLs in gray, medium efficacy. And then on the top of the chart, you see the wide availability of general LEDs in blue and tube LEDs in orange. Next slide, please. This is another way of seeing the data, and just to show that LEDs are overall more efficient than the fluorescent lamps alternatives. In the first part of the chart, you see the comparison between linear fluorescent lamps and the LED linear retrofit lamps. What you see in the middle is the average efficacy of the lamps that we found in the market for linear fluorescents between 57 and 84, of course, with a range that goes a little bit below, a little bit above. And then for linear LED retrofit lamps, 90 to 100 lumen per watts. So very clearly, LED linear retrofit lamps more efficient than their counterpart fluorescents. Similarly, in the bottom part of the chart, you see the comparison between compact fluorescents and LED lamps. Average efficacy values of compact fluorescents is between 53 and 60, and for LED lamps, always more efficient between 81 and 97. Next slide, please. In order to answer the question on affordability, we collected information on the cost of the lamps. And we also estimated the payback period, which is a very important factor for consumers as well. This takes into consideration the average energy use over the year and the electricity prices that are relevant for country. So with these estimates, we calculated payback periods of LEDs for every country for the most common lamps. And what you see here is that in the case of CFLs and their LED replacement lamps, the payback period for LEDs, it's instant in most cases. That means the LED has the same or even lower cost of the CFL alternative. And then in some cases, it's just a matter of weeks. So very important for consumers because this means they will recover that price differential in just a few weeks and then will enjoy electricity bill savings for the rest of the duration of the lamp. Similarly, on the case of linear fluorescent lamps and the LED alternatives, payback periods are a little bit longer, but are always below a year. This is because there is still a small price differential between LED alternatives and the linear fluorescent lamps, but still very low payback periods, especially for these lamps that are used in commercial sectors, and that will translate in significant energy bill savings for those consumers. We are showing here the results of the African region. We have the same results for GRULAC and for the Asia Pacific region as well. So if we can go to the next slide, you will see something very similar. Instant payback periods in some cases, a matter of a few weeks in other countries for the LED lamps replacing CFLs. And then for LEDs, linear lamps replacing linear fluorescent lamps, again, a few months in some instances, but always less than a year. Next slide. And this is the results for the Asia Pacific. So we are issuing today a report, a global report that has the detailed results of all the regions, including the data available for each country as well. I invite you to download the report. At the end of the presentation, we have a link here so that you can go and find the relevant information for your country as well. And with this, I'll hand it over to Satish, who is going to talk us a little bit about the current situation in India in terms of progress to transition into LEDs.
Thank you, Anna. Yeah, I hope you can hear me.
Yes, we can hear you well.
Good morning, good evening, and good afternoon. Thank you. Yeah, so I'll share some details about the developments in India. And as we can see on the right, speed that the LED story is very, very interesting. We can see that in the last 4 years, that between 2014 and 18, the LED market sales have skyrocketed from 5 million lamps to 670 million lamps. This is a phenomenal growth in the market for LED lamps in India. And there are several critical drivers which are possible. One of it is about the national policies and programs which have been given by the government of India. The first has been the e-waste management rules, which essentially covers two aspects of lamps. One is about the mercury content in CFL lamps, and second part of the law, the end of life management of lamps or the waste. Under both these, India is already complying with the Minamata provisions of CFL and LFLs, and it has more stringent mercury limits for the same categories. It happened in 2016, and as regards the end of life management of the waste, this has also been placed on the responsibility of the producers, and they have to implement this EPR and manage the waste, which has been a bit of a problem for many of these producers in this country at a point of time. The second important notification or the regulation that has come about very recently, that happened in September 2021, is that Ministry of Environment and Forest has recently restricted the imports of mercury, metal mercury. This now falls under the restricted category as per the Minamata Convention, and you will have to, any importer that has requirements of mercury will need to do a big process, prior informed consent process, that is as described. There is another important body which works in India, which is the Bureau of Energy Efficiency. And most of these lights today, LED lamps, are being, they need a efficiency rating or energy efficiency rating by Bureau of Energy Efficiency. They have started a program on which the lamps are rated. This is a entry program which was started in 2015, and this program is ongoing. So that means that lamps have to be rated, and this is the star rating program, and this happens for many appliances, and lamps have also been covered under this scheme. So it improves the efficiency of lamps that are being manufactured and available in the market. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Yeah. Another important advancement or a policy decision which has been taken in the country is about the Ujjwala program, which was flagged off in 2015 by the Prime Minister of India, and issue of use LED bulbs, save money, and take part in helping our nation. This is by Prime Minister of India, Mr. Narendra Modi, who launched the program in 2015. This is billed as the world's largest zero subsidy LED program for domestic consumers. And what it had, the components of it, is that LED bulbs, it promoted the use of LED lamps, and lamps were made available for domestic consumers at a very, very cheap price, almost at 1/3 of the market price it was made available. And in many areas, it was to many people who are poorer, it was given free of cost. The goal was to replace about 770 old lamps by LED lamps. At this point of time, almost more than 50% of this target has already been met. It also reduces the annual household electricity bills by about 15% to consumers, and there is overall saving of about 16 billion INR every year. This also has a very, very important energy saving component, which is in, please. Next slide.
Next slide. Go ahead, Satish.
And as per the report, which is a vision document by the, this is India Lighting Industry Association, or the ELCOMA, as we call them, Lighting Manufacturer Association. There's a vision document 2024, which aims to grow the LED lighting industry by fully localizing manufacture and assembly of LED lamps and eliminating the dependence on imports.
Satish, we cannot hear you very well. Maybe, put the video on.
Currently, a lot of the production that happens by importing components, but this will help in many ways to bring down the price of LED lamps, which is slightly more expensive as compared to the normal safer lamps, and it will reduce complete dependence on imports, and it will make manufacturing easy here in India. This, coupled with consumer awareness campaigns that ELCOMA will run on the benefits of purchasing and installing LED lamps, it will boost indigenous LED manufacturing companies. So essentially, it will help India to become a manufacturing hub, and it will also open up export opportunities for the Indian industry. So that is a small presentation from about India. Thank you. Over to Rachel.
Thank you, Satish. Good afternoon, everyone. Good morning. I will talk about the African perspective with regards to lighting. And here we see on this slide the lighting policy and legislative landscape. In Africa, this is changing fast. Many countries in the region are shifting towards LEDs only markets through energy efficiency policies and mercury regulations. 22 countries in the Southern African region and East African region have adopted minimum energy performance standards, which are used by regulators to make sure that products meet certain specified criteria related to energy performance and also the quality of service and longevity as well. ECOWAS is also has also developed some energy efficiency plan to phase out old incandescent lamps and replace them with high efficiency CFL and LEDs. Next slide, please. Just to mention that these standards will shift the African market towards LEDs. The African governments are also making direct market interventions to promote toxic-free and energy-efficient lighting. Countries such as Nigeria, Burkina Faso, Zambia, among others, have carried out lamp replacement programs in a bid to encourage the public to embrace efficient lighting. Another good example is Ivory Coast, which has been supplying LED lamps for public lighting in major cities since 2019, and this is on top of offering reduced taxes on LEDs. Ghana has waived import duty and VAT on LEDs as well. Nigeria has also highlighted strategies to achieve energy efficiency. If you look at the Nigerian energy policy for 2013, it mentions replacing all incandescent lighting in every home, and they're hoping that this would be replaced with LEDs by 2025. Next slide, please. LED businesses are coming up in many African countries. Here you see a list of countries in Africa where LED assembling is being done. And as an import-based market, phasing out fluorescence would encourage local manufacturing of LEDs. This would align very well with the regional efforts that I've mentioned earlier to stimulate the economic growth, as well as generate employment opportunities within Africa. Next slide, please. With regards to the price and payback period comparisons, based on the research that we carried out, some LED brands are actually already cheaper today, or at least at price parity with CFLs. The payback period for tube lighting is less than a year, as you can see, and I will show that in the next slide. Payback period on general lighting is less than 18 weeks in majority of the market, and instant for some of the products in Ghana, for example, or in Burkina Faso. And moving on to the slide, to the next slide, here is a very good example of cost effectiveness comparison between fluorescent and LEDs. This is in Nigeria. And in this example, we see a linear fluorescent lamp from Nigeria. These are two different lamps. So one of them, they're fluorescent. One of them is fluorescent, one that is highlighted in red, and the other one is LED. And you can see here that they have the same light output, but when the life cycle cost is analyzed over 15 years, you can see there that I will just go a little bit deeper into that. Price for one lamp, for example, in Nigeria is 500 for the T8 fluorescent lamp, as compared to 950 in Nigerian currency, which is equivalent to $1.20. So the LED is slightly more expensive, but when you look at the wattage, and if you look at the lifetime of this of the LED is almost 4 times that of the fluorescent tube. And as if you look further down, if you look at the cost of operating the lamp for 15 years discounted to 2022, the cost is almost double for the fluorescent lamp as compared to the LED lamp. So the payback period for this kind of in this kind of example is 9 months. That is for a fluorescent lamp, and we have seen here that the LED is 45% less expensive than the fluorescent. Next slide, please.
Can accelerate, please, Rachel.
Sorry?
If you could accelerate, please, because we are running, reaching the time. Thank you.
Okay, this is actually almost the last slide. See, this is just a summary of the global and regional benefits cumulative between 2025 and 2050. And you can see here that for the Asia Pacific region, the mercury that would be avoided if we actually had a global ban on the fluorescent lighting would be in the Asia Pacific would be 75 metric tons. Latin America would be 11, Africa 4.9, and if I jump there, and the carbon that would be avoided, for example, in total would be 4,639 tons globally. And with regards to the electricity bill savings globally, that is 1,277 billion US dollars. That is actually a lot of savings if you consider that if the African Lighting Amendment, for example, would be adopted at the Minamata COP. And the last slide, please. Yeah, for more information, we have a report that contains detailed information about the study that we carried out, and you can find it on this link. As my colleague Michael mentioned, these slides will be circulated, and on this link, you can be able to access and download the global report that we did. Thank you very much, everybody, for your attention.
Thank you very much, everybody. Apologies for the little delay. I've seen that there have been like 3 questions in the chat, but these have already been answered. So I don't know if the panelists want to say something more in relation to those questions, and maybe we have a couple of minutes for some additional ones. Otherwise, I think, yeah, what the written answers were already made. I don't know if one of the panelists would like to say something more. No? So I don't see any hand. And I don't think I see any other question. Yeah, the link of the report. I don't know if you want to put already the link of the report in the chat so that can be accessible to people following us. Otherwise, I think we can close the session. I don't see any other questions. I hope we will have time. Thank you, Mike, for the link. So thank you very much for all this information, which comes across the whole world, from the developed countries, but also all the way to the developing countries. So this important information, I think, it would be good to have in mind as we walk into the COP in the coming weeks. So I hope to see you all there, and we can continue the discussions face to face, hopefully. Thank you very much, and safe travels for whoever goes to the COP. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Elena, thank you. Thank you all.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.